as women start earning more, marital satisfaction goes down for men and for women. As women move up the corporate ladder, they're more likely to become divorced, but that's not true for men. If women win political office, they're more likely to get divorced than the women counterparts who lost their political office. The more women gain status, the more discord happens in their marriage.
Did you see the Serena Williams article in Vogue?
I did not.
Oh, well, let me tell you about it. So,
please do.
Her issue, the article is about the fact she's now 41. She's still a top flight tennis player. And she's got one child, I think Olympia, and was aware that she would have a limited window, perhaps, to have more children. So is having to leave the sport. She had some complications medically after the last child. Perhaps slightly brought on by being an elite athlete. I don't know the sort of stresses that puts your body under, the kind of internal changes or external changes. And then there's a couple of sections here. So, believe me, I never wanted to have to choose between tennis and a family, she wrote. I don't think it's fair if I were a guy. I wouldn't be writing this because I'd be out there playing and winning while my wife was doing the physical labor of expanding our family. I have to presume that she means the literal physical labor of expanding the family. Maybe I'd be more of a Tom Brady if I had that opportunity, Williams wrote, pointing that the football legend Brady, 45, who has 3 children and played in the NFL for 22 seasons before announcing his retirement in February, before changing his mind and announcing that he would return for a 23rd season just 1 month later. Ahead of her 41st birthday, Williams realized she had a narrow window to get pregnant again. I definitely don't want to be pregnant again as an athlete, she said. These days, if I have to choose between building my tennis resume and building a family, I choose the latter. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, especially since I think Tom Brady's unretirement is causing discord in his own marriage from, at least what the gossip is, right? But, there's something to that. Women do often have to make a trade-off that men, typically don't have to. This is kind of a new thing with, women being able to be the Serena Williams of the world, or I'm blanking on a name of CEO of a company, and we kind of have to figure out, like, what are we going to excel at? Are we going to excel at our careers? Or are we going to excel as a parent? Because it's really hard to do both very well at the same time, and so. Historically, that has sort of been the contract that we used to enter into through marriages. The male works and the female stays at home and runs the household, which is a lot of work. And what I find really interesting is now that women have made tremendous strides into the workplace, they're finding themselves no better off in terms of households, running of the household and things that they have to do to make, the household run. All of that unpaid labor isn't going away. It's still there. And what we find through the research is that working women actually do more housework than women who are stay-at-home moms.
What's the statistics behind that? How does that work?
Well, we just sort of get them to report how many hours a day they spend on various, things or activities around the house. And what I think is happening is that working women feel more guilt surrounding, not doing what's typically, thought of as, helping around the house. And they're actually doing more. And more housework than that was done even in the 60s. Now that has a lot to do with kids too, because kids require a lot of parental involvement now than I think was happening, certainly in the 50s and 60s with scheduling and all that kind of stuff.
What's scheduling?
Well, now there's more parent involvement in, even play dates. You got to call up the other parent. You got to figure out, who's volunteering for this and that and the other thing. And I think there's, and kids are involved in so many extracurricular activities.
Rather than just letting them to go play stickball out in the street.
Yeah,
okay.
Just by 6 and, so.
Yeah. So this is perhaps a byproduct, not of helicopter parenting, but of an overly observant parental style.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that part of it is, helicopter parenting that we're doing now more than we ever had before. We just kind of, let our kids run around and that's a whole nother topic, I guess, to talk about is, how we manage our kids' lives now in a way that we never had, before.
Going back to what you said at the very beginning, it's a novel situation that we found ourselves in where women can have the choice between being a carer or having a career.
Yeah.
And I think it's the UK statistics say that more women are childless at 30 than not now in the UK. So 50.1% of women by 30 do not have children. So they are in the bigger age bracket. I also saw Joyce Benenson's newest paper quotes just offhand, half of all women in the world are married by 18. Half of all women in the world are married by the age of 18.
Wow.
That blew my mind. Those two statistics side by side absolutely took my head off.
So some of those women are waiting that long.
No. So what I think it is that the childless at 30, 50.1% is exclusively, I want to say it's the UK. I think it's the UK. There's definitely one in Wales. Okay. My point being that even this is novel ancestrally, the choice between the two, and it is very much a weird phenomenon as well, Western educated, industrialized, blah, blah. It's very much over our side, but on average, half of all women in the world are married by 18, evidently skewed by probably a lot of Africa or a lot of India, subcontinental stuff.
So that doesn't shock me as much, but I'd be interested to know, like, for the United States or other Western countries, it's got to be much.
Oh, way later. Way later. Yeah.
Later. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, that's a mismatch, ancestrally from, what usually happens in terms of mating. And it's so interesting because usually there's this critical period when kids hit puberty and they become really interested in, that's where like intersexual competition comes in. And this is where, and girls hit it before boys hit it. And you get a sense of like, where do you sort of land on the mating market? And it kind of solidifies. So if you are a big nerd in high school, you never lose that nerdiness. I know, because that's me. I never lose it. In my mind, I'm, a nerd. And so that's when, you're supposed to be figuring out, where you're going to go. And that's when all of the great magic happened in terms of mating, ancestrally. And now we have this period where, we just keep dating and keep dating and keep dating and keep dating. And, reproducing or not. And certainly a lot of women delay it. I mean, Serena Williams is a geriatric mother, in terms of, in today's terms too, but she's not unlike a lot of women who are delaying it. There's, women do have a lot more options now, even though that trade-off still haunts us because, we can move up that corporate ladder, but as women move up the corporate ladder, that doesn't open up a whole new sea of men who are going to come home and shore up all of the duties on the home front, whereas the reverse is true for men. So women kind of find themselves in this, in this dilemma where they're contributing a lot at home financially, and they're contributing a lot at home with unpaid labor. And that could be just because women don't want to relinquish, some of the things to men. Men also tend to do more, I guess, what's a good word for it? Manly type of household labor, like mowing the lawn or, fixing things as opposed to laundry and all the other stuff that has to get done. And so, this can now within marriages cause a lot of unpaid labor disputes that were never around before, and discord and resentment and all that kind of stuff that bubbles up.
Did you look at the fact that women deny the fact that they're the primary breadwinner even when they are one?
Yes. So in a survey of married couples where all of them were involved in a situation where the woman was the breadwinner, over 60% said that was not true. So in a survey where we know this about people want to report in a socially desirable way. So that's a problem in most, experiments that use surveys. But it was interesting because they were pre-selected sample of individuals where researchers knew that these were couples where the woman was the breadwinner and they didn't want to report it, that was actually the case. So over 60% said that they were not, that it was the man, or that they were equal.
Well, culturally at the moment, are we not seeing a lot of female empowerment? You can have it all, be a boss bitch, clap back, compete with the men. More women, 2-to-1, female to males, completing 4-year US college degrees by 2030. £1,111 more earned by women between the ages of 21 and 29 in the UK. Mm-hmm. It seems surprising to me that women would underreport the fact that they are the primary breadwinners when culturally, at least what the media perhaps says, this isn't necessarily emergent, bottom up, this isn't what's happening in terms of norms, but there does seem to be a pretty big push for women to become more masculinized in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's so that's the haunting of sort of the traditional norms that still are not, even though there is a lot of movement towards, women, female empowerment. It's really hard to give. So a lot of women still want a partner who is at, sort of at their own level. So making as much as them or more. And, they want a counterpart. And so I could see where, that still, so the reflection of women not wanting to say, yeah, I'm the breadwinner. Like it is the haunting of that, sort of traditional values that we used to have. Like they've been around for so long where we had this system of, women having this obligatory investment in children and men going off to do other things. I mean, women couldn't go off to war because then children would die. And so would any genes that supported a penchant for waging war in women. Men were free to go do that because they weren't having the babies. And, and that's something that we do know that was happening. Women were having the babies, men were not having the babies. And so, all of our, female ancestors going, back in time. Now, this is before birth control. And so we still, so if you were a woman and you were sexually active, you were probably a mother, most certainly. And so we didn't have the luxuries of, outsourcing any care for most of human existence. So all of the stuff that's happening in our modern world now is really new, and our brains just haven't caught up. So we have a part of our brain that can say, women empowerment, and that's kind of, we kind of have to, push the social norms forward, and then, we learn what we're valued, and it can cause change. But, the part of our brain that can think about this stuff intellectually is scaffolded onto, deeper brain systems that have just been around for, millions of years. And it's a hard override sometimes.
Do careers make women happy?
Yes. So I would say it also depends on the career. I would say it depends on the job. I think that, women face more of that not mating parenting, but like sort of status-driving parenting conflict. The career family trade-off conflict. I think that women experience it more than men do. But when women are able to, take time for themselves and pursue what they're passionate about, that increases their overall well-being. But women experience a lot of burnout. Women experience a lot of stress because there are these, demands on them.
Well, someone needs to give birth to the child, right? Someone needs to do that. The bit that kind of got me a little bit about Serena's discussion there, the bit that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, was when she said about labor, doing the physical labor. It's like, look, like men can't get pregnant. That is an issue that we have. I understand that there are some disparities. Men think about sex more than women. Should we say that the fact that women don't think about sex as much as men do is an imbalance that needs to be corrected so that men can be made more happy in the world? I don't know. My point being that, especially for the first couple of years, I don't have kids, but I'm around some friends that do, and the dad is a spare part for the first 2 years. The mother is the one
Sure.
that has more of an innate sense about what the child needs. The mother is the one that the child seems to pine for a lot more. They're the ones that have a better bond. They're the ones that are able to deal with crying and nappy changes and care, and they have this intuition. That is an imbalance between the capacities of men and the capacities of women. I mean, Serena's worth several $100 million. I'm sure that she can find a perfectly successful team of nannies that could come in and take over. But the fact that she might feel guilt around doing that isn't something I think that's been laid at her feet from like vestigial evolutionary oppression or some sort of ruling of pressure from men. I think that it is a byproduct of the fact that the way that we create babies is asymmetric with regards to what men and women do in terms of their investment.
Yeah, I think so too. So you're saying it's not an evolutionary vestige, but the biological, facts
Reality,
are what they
yes.
are. Yeah. And so, I mean, and Serena, so all of these things putting so much burden on women, and there's so many women who are just like burnt out because of this trade-off. But women of means do have the ability to outsource this, even at the level of outsourcing, through surrogacy, who has the baby. A lot of women are doing this now, right? So
Is that what rich women do?
I think so. Don't they?
I don't know.
That's part of it. So she could do that if she wanted to do it, but she's already a mother. And for many women, once that switch gets turned on, there's so much biology that comes online that was never online before, that has to do with an increase in nurturing and wanting to care for children. So there's a caregiving mismatch between men and women, and not mismatch, but maybe that's the wrong word
Imbalance.
for it, but it's just, an imbalance. So, moms are just more nurturing than dads. And a lot of that has to do with once you have a baby, boy, do these hormones, the hormones are basically the puppeteers of our behavior. And once you have a baby, we have this whole suite of hormones that come online and, direct our mothering behavior. We see it across all other species. I mean, for those of you who have seen, animals become mothers, you could see, a female who, was, aggressive and taking huge risks, and then she has a baby, and she might take risks to that baby, but she all of a sudden becomes like the most caring and nurturing, mama bear. And so men don't ever have, I mean, certainly things happen, and there has been research showing that, when men become fathers, their hormonal profile changes too, but not to the level of what happens for women with prolactin and oxytocin, and that sort of direct that, that caregiving. And I don't know how much that goes away, because we still have, even after you have kids and they grow up, you're becoming a grandmother. I mean, that whole process where women can no longer reproduce, and the leading theory is that, then you're no longer reproducing because your daughters are starting to reproduce, and you cannot help her if you also
grandmother
have your own
hypothesis.
children. Yeah, the grandmother hypothesis. And so I don't know that there was huge selection pressure for women to ever, lose that once they became mothers and started having children.
Go one step behind that. Is there a natural impulse for women to want to have children at all?
That is a really great question. And so, yeah.
Just to clarify the question, obviously the point is women could want to have sex, and a byproduct of having sex would be having children. What we talked about here is that once you have a child, there is a maternal cascade that gets flicked on and is very difficult perhaps to stop, and not only continues through child number 1, potentially 2, 3, 4, and so on, but then also continues you into grandmotherhood as well, and all the rest of it. The point that I'm interested in is, prior to having the child, is there an impulse to have children?
So yes and no. So women are complicated because we have two hormones when we're naturally cycling. So on birth control is a whole nother ball of wax. But so women have, sex hormones. We have testosterone, but the primary one in women is, I shouldn't even say primary one, because, we have a significant amount of testosterone, but across the cycle, estrogen increases, and then it dips down again, and then progesterone increases, and we're preparing our body every month for a pregnancy. And progesterone is more of a nurturing hormone that will increase progressively if the woman becomes pregnant within that cycle. And so, I used to do a lot of work looking at women's changes in women's behavior across the cycle. And so when looking at desire to have a child, even things like would you get an abortion, and really heavy questions that, I tend to steer away from now because there's such hot buttons. But what we find is that when women are ovulating, so this is a time when, estrogen has just increased, and it's, they're really interested, their sexual desire is increased. And what dips down is all the parenting stuff. So they're not interested in children at all when they're ovulating. Now, when that's finished and their body is preparing to potentially become pregnant, then that interest creeps up a little bit. So to answer your question, before women have babies, are they more interested in having children than men? I bet you if we just randomly sampled, we'd find a sex difference there. But because women kind of cycle in and out of, high hormones that do two different things, one's mating and sex, one's parenting, that, it kind of depends. So yeah, you're right. Like, we don't need an interest in children to get them. We just need an interest in sex. But once women become pregnant, that's when, nature says, all right, time to do the caregiving, time to become more nurturing and want to do the, the nesting, and we set up for the baby, and we become interested in watching, bringing home baby, and we wonder why our partners aren't interested in it, and they're not reading all the books that we want them to read because this is a big deal. So it's like, then it's a complete, shift.
So would you say perhaps that men and women diverge a lot more in their behavior and their predisposition upon the point at which women get pregnant? I imagine that must cause a little bit of friction in marriages, especially where the man and woman perhaps were very similar for a long time, and then there is this big cascade of hormones that gets released. I've also heard that toward the back end of pregnancy, that women can actually feel more turned off or even partially disgusted by the smell of their male partner, and they're more attracted to the smell of their own kin. So their genetic lineage, and this again is, look, I'm very, very close. I'm to giving birth. I'm very, very vulnerable. I need to be with someone that I know is no physical threat to me. There's also, changes in hormones when girls go on the pill versus come off the pill. There's apparently potential changes in attraction toward mates. That one of the pieces of dating advice that I saw floating around on the internet is, before you marry a woman, get her to come off the pill for 6 months to see if she still likes you. And all of this stuff. My point being, like, it's fascinating. The hormonal profile of women is absolutely fascinating, and it's fascinating in a way that men, I don't think, are really ever going to understand.
Yeah, I don't think so. It is really interesting, and before. So your original question was, do women want children? Or something like this.
Yes.
And so all of the stuff before they become a mom, I think a lot of that is the, sort of social values that we learn. I mean, it's kind of like what you do, is, get married and have a kid. And, that's part of it too. And part of it probably is, once a month, we have this kind of, hormones that come online that make us feel like I should probably have a family. and then it's a week of, having higher sexual desire. And then it's,
I heard that the behavior change across women's ovulatory cycle has come under quite a lot of fire and criticism recently. What's your thoughts on that? I know you've done a lot of work here.
So I think the criticism comes from, how are we calculating the cycle, and how are we estimating fertility? Because for a long time that varied. It was almost like it varied by researcher. And so there was a lot of criticism about having such flexibility with how you calculate it, means that you can just sort of figure out where your effect that you want to show sits in all of these different ways, and maybe one of them works and you can publish a paper on it. So there was a big push to come to a consensus with how are we going to be estimating fertility? Well, the best way is to really just go in and measure day by day hormonal profiles, and as clinically, and then figure that out, as opposed to like having a researcher estimate the cycles and so forth. But anytime, so there's a lot of stereotypes that surround women and hormones. Women are hormonal. Women, don't make them cry. They shouldn't be, holding political office because maybe they're going to be on their period and they're cranky and this and the other. And so because of those stereotypes, it's really difficult to study changes in women's behavior across the cycle, because I've gotten personally a lot of pushback on looking at behavioral shifts related to, shifts in hormones on items that are issues that, are pretty sensitive. So like political preference and
oh yeah, didn't you put something out that CNN had a problem with, to do with Obama and voting? Tell us that.
Yeah. So first of all, men's hormones influence all this stuff too.
Look,
so,
Kristina, you don't need to give another caveat, right? You're among friends here.
Okay. Yes. And, that was I should have been prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for the pushback. So what had happened with that is I started seeing little shifts in my data in women's religiosity. So just general questions that we just had as part of, general surveys that we would give women, like, how much do you believe in God? And then it would there would be a dip at ovulation, like they believed less. I'm like, that's so weird. And that's kind of how we started following up on it, was looking at women's religious views. And they would loosen a little bit. So we're not talking like, I'm a devout Catholic and then I'm ovulating and now I'm an atheist. These are just like tiny shifts, but we pick them up because it's the same woman serving as her own control throughout the cycle. And that has a lot of statistical power. So even if you just become, if you're answering on a scale 1 through 9 and you're at an 8 and you come down to a 7, that's going to pick up as something shifting inside of you. And so from there, as a young scholar, I was like, oh my God, this is probably having major implications for even political views, especially the social political views that have sort of like, the sort of sexual undertones to them, like wanting to control people's sexuality or punish for different mating strategies and stuff like that. And so that's where I took it into looking at social political orientation and finding that it was kind of similar for single women, at least in my data. And then I thought, well, this is going to come into play. And it just happened that, Obama was running against Mitt Romney and they were both relatively attractive men. So it was kind of like I could control for that because they're both tall and attractive. And I ran a survey and asked these social political questions and calculated the fertility. It was a cross-sectional, so wherever a woman was on the day that I did this huge survey, and I asked them to who they're going to vote for. And we found that when single women were ovulating versus when they were not, they were more likely to, they became a lot more liberal and more likely to vote for Obama. But the reverse was true for women who were in committed relationships. So they became a bit more conservative. And
when they were ovulating.
Yeah, when they were ovulating and more likely to vote for Mitt Romney. So again, ovulation, estrogen is the sex hormone that's high, and it's shifting these, views. And so there must be some underlying sexual strategy implication for what's going on.
What do you think that is?
Well, it's like, we really want our attitudes and our behaviors to be as aligned as possible. So if our behavior is one thing, our attitude is, we're going to shift our attitude to match it. So, for women in relationships, so the answer is, I don't really know for sure, but here's what I think is going on. You're really interested in sex, more so at ovulation than any other time in the month. And so when you're thinking a lot about sex, it's really hard to also think about God for many women. So so for single women, it's a little bit easier to understand because, they're free to think about sex and have sex with the partner that they can optimize mate choice with. Women can't really optimize mate choice who are in marriages unless that is their, partner. And they're tending to become more conservative, I think, because that's the relationship that they're in, is a mated relationship.
Would there be potentially something around wanting to control other women's sexual, like intrasexual competition for mates at this? But I would have thought that would have been higher among the women that hadn't yet found a mate. I thought that they would have wanted to control the sexuality of other women more when they don't have a mate that's locked down than when they do.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. One of the interpretations that we had for the women in relationships was just that it's punishing promiscuous women because you've kind of have a steady stream of resources. You've got a partner, and women who are single represent a threat to that. Now,
so you're invested in the market more.
Yeah. And so I think that, so they're like abortion, yes, same-sex marriage, no. I mean, even though, so these things are tangentially related to sexual strategies, even like drug use, so that they didn't want, marijuana to be legalized, these women in relationships. So I think it's trying to lock down the threat, the behavior, to punish the behavior of all those women out there who are threats to what they have. Now, so yes, single women are still competitive, but I think that, they're on the hunt for.
Well, they've got less skin in the game, right?
Yeah, they've got less skin in the game, because if you lose a husband to one of these women, and yeah, I mean, we didn't look at it. It'd be interesting to look at it even outside of the cycle, and somebody might have looked at this. So you kind of just align yourself with the values that are, associated with your way of life, and protecting that.
Yeah, you want the world to give you more of what it is that you've got at the moment, or what you think would enable you to move forward with the strategy. Okay, so going back to the relative career dynamics within couples, men and women. Vincent Haranam, who you might be familiar with, he's been on the show before. He had some really interesting statistics I just want to give you here around financial prospects and mate desirability and stuff. Women valued good financial prospects in a mate roughly twice as much as men did. This gender difference has not changed. In fact, in a 2014 Pew Research survey reported that 78% of unmarried women placed a high premium on finding a spouse with a steady job. Only 48% of men shared this view. One study found that marriages where the wife out-earned the husband were 50% more likely to end in divorce. Another study also found that men who were not the primary breadwinner were more likely to use erectile dysfunction medication relative to men that were. I've also seen statistics around women who are the primary breadwinner faking more orgasms, reporting less sexual satisfaction. So for all that it's well and good offering women the opportunity to try and have it all, to be able to do both, it seems like a zero-sum game, at least in part, or a closer to zero-sum game than a positive-sum game. And this is the fundamental issue of trade-offs, right? Having it all is not possible. Everybody has to make trade-offs. And it seems like if men help women and that causes a relationship to be more likely to fail, what are we doing here?
If men help women do what? Have a job?
To focus more onto their career if they push them across. But in so doing, they basically hamstring themselves to be on a ticking time clock. I've also seen William Costello was telling me that hypergamy, there is a little bit of data showing that hypergamy is reducing, but it's reducing directly proportionally in line with female infidelity, but not male infidelity. So, yeah, wild.
Yeah. So yes, this is a conundrum, but, so many women, Oh, it's a hard subject to talk about because I personally am a huge proponent of women building wealth because I think it equals freedom. And that brings a lot of value with it. But yes, it does disturb partnerships. There's no way around that. So you're right. As women start earning more, marital satisfaction goes down for men and for women. And, as there's that's really interesting, the data that you were talking about. I know that we had dug some up for a paper that we were writing, looking at, as women move up the corporate ladder, they're more likely to become divorced, but that's not true for men. If women win political office, they're more likely to get divorced than the women counterparts who lost their political office.
Oh
So
my
it just
God.
the more women gain status, the more discord happens in their marriage. And, I guess that's no big shocker. So like, how do you get around that? I mean, there are many relationships out there. You'd have to be like, you are, the, Michael Dell, and you help, your wife get it's never going to be at your level. So that's not going to be a problem. It's more of like the sort of like, mid-manager level, problems when like when you have dual couples that are, fighting that's another thing, fighting for time for your career.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's another element. Why do you think it is that women who earn a lot of money want a man that earns a lot of money?
Well, so I think that's, also a vestige that's very deeply seated in our brain, and it's hard to eradicate that. It almost like you feel like so much power and value in being able to, attract a man of high status. Also, you have more in common with that person, or maybe you feel like you do, or you feel like you're more attracted to those kind of men. That doesn't go away as a woman gains higher in status. And so, I know that, there's folks that say, oh, well, women are going to have to start going for, blue collar guys who just make a lot of money and they're a plumber. And, again, we have that part of our brain that might be able to do a couple of, gymnastics, mental gymnastics, and come to that. But it's really difficult. So that, wanting someone who's your counterpart or even higher than you in status, it's pretty down deep inside of our brain. And so, can we overcome it? Yeah. How do we overcome it? I think like the most highest status men in the world are going to have to start doing laundry, and we're going to have to see it, and they're going to have to start taking parental leave to take care of their kids, and we're going to have to see it.
So what you're saying here is that the men that hold the highest status, that cascade down from there, the social norms that other men follow, that tell us what is highly regarded, what is held in high status,
Yes.
need to be setting an example by doing things which affords men who are struggling to compete with their female mates, earning education, status potential. It allows them to be put on a pedestal for doing things that would have been typically more domestic.
Right.
I think that may be a difficult ask.
Yeah, I think I think it is. I think because you're saying it's a difficult ask because men aren't going to want to do that stuff.
Especially the men at the top.
Yeah, and if it is, it's a stage like George Clooney's doing laundry today.
For a photo op.
People magazine.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, maybe there needs to be that. Maybe companies can mandate their leadership team take family leave. So there are things that can happen, and yeah, I don't think men are going to be lining up for, laundry or whatever, but I could see that changing, women. Yeah. So it's like, I can't get George Clooney, but I want someone who's like him, and he's a guy who does laundry. So that's acceptable. And I'm still attracted to my mate who is going around doing this in my house.
We are up against a serious God's eye coordination problem here, aren't we? This is one of the fascinating things. I very much enjoy talking about the dynamics that underpin it. I very much get switched off when I hear people on the internet, a lot of the time on Twitter, saying that this is the way that the world should be. And the reason that I do that is it sounds a lot like hypocrisy to me, because revealed and stated preferences are clashing up against each other face first here.
Yes.
The only reason that Tom Holland and Zendaya made headlines, apart from the fact that they're both superstars, was that she's taller than him. And that was being used as, look, you see, short men shouldn't be so self-conscious about their height. You go, do you really think that short men aren't trying to date Zendaya? Like, do you really think that that's the case? So my point being that when stated preferences get put out on the internet, they sound great and egalitarian. When revealed preferences come through, everybody's still trying to chase down. I mean, I'm sure that you've seen this Leonardo DiCaprio thing at the moment, right?
It's so funny, that graph.
Unbelievable, right? Okay, so I know that you've done research on bad boys. Women, why are women still chasing bad boys? Leonardo DiCaprio, John Mayer, and do women's preferences for bad boys change over time as they age?
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, when we say bad boy, I mean, that's like a moniker that we use, I guess, to mean somebody who's really socially dominant and, charismatic. And, I always use George Clooney, but I know he's like so dated because anybody I mention that to is like, he's really old now.
Yeah, who's
Any
that?
student is like, oh, he's old. Well, who can I use? I don't know. But, just sort of like, thinking about the classic, rebel without a cause type of a guy. I mean, like, think about all the movies and the songs and the metal bands. I mean, these guys are sexy.
But more than that, there's something evolutionarily put in there as well.
There's something evolutionarily there. So social dominance, it bought you a lot over the course of human history, and it bought you a lot of status. And if you were a risk taker, that bought you a lot. You were really good at protection. You were really good at finding. So all of these are sort of like proxies for like estimations about how good you might be in terms of, yes, getting resources, but yes, your status. But, if we talk about our most anciently evolved attraction systems, it's indirect genetic benefits. And then when
what's that mean?
That means genes. So if this is the top dog guy, and if I have I'm attracted to him, so we don't have to think if I have a baby with him, my son's going to have those genes. Like,
Sexy
we don't really
son.
think, but it's just like that increased attraction. Like, you are just programmed to optimize mate choice. And so that's why we find these like devil may care guys. So now, is it as valuable in our, nowadays? I don't know. That's a question that maybe we can talk about, but it certainly was ancestrally. These are the guys that were the first ones up on the hill when we needed to conquer, another group. But, so, but these guys also don't make the best husbands in the world. So often women do have to make a trade-off between, different features in a mate that they value.
Didn't you find out, though, that women looked at bad boys and that they did think that they would be better fathers?
Yeah, for them. So, yes. So, this is one of my favorite studies I ever ran, because we hired an actor and he was just amazing because he played both roles. He
pretended he was a twin, right?
Yeah. And he was like superb at it. And we had a Hollywood screenwriter write a bad boy, and we had a Hollywood screenwriter write a kind of a nerd, a shy, standoffish kind of guy. And yeah, when women were imagining, so they were talking to this guy thinking he was a prospective partner for them, like they might date. And so then when they're like thinking about themselves with this guy, they did, when they were ovulating, report that, oh my God, I could totally see him doing my dishes and he'd probably be a great dad. And so it's like these, rose-colored glasses came on, especially when it came to partner skills. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, when I'm ovulating, I think he's going to be a better guitar player or a better piano player or nicer to his grandma. It was like, he's going to be a better partner for me overall. So yeah, but that's kind of
sorry, outside of ovulating, were these women or were other women not seeing the bad boy as the preferential carer? Would they have seen the nerd?
So I don't remember these. So it's like the stable guy, we always kind of want those qualities at some level, but it wasn't like they were totally turned off by the bad guy or bad boy guy at at lower fertility.
But that's the dangerous element, right? Like, this is where some of the redder corners of the internet find kernels of truth that they can latch onto that.
Right.
you use charisma and social dominance as a proxy for confidence, competence, conscientiousness, industriousness, all of the thing, status, resources, blah, blah, blah. And it's pretty robust, which is a little bit of a difficult one because, again, revealed and stated preferences. But then I suppose these are stated preferences as well, right?
So they are, but we also videotaped their behaviors and, nonverbal, verbal. They were acting very differently, with these
Flicking the hair and the playing with
flicking the hair and, and so in the same session, they met with these set of twins. One twin was nerdy, one twin was a bad
same
boy.
guy.
And that guy asked the same question. So for example, like the nerdy guy would be like, so what are you doing for the holiday? Oh, me and my boyfriend are going to go to Las Vegas. Then the bad boy asks her what she's going to be doing for the holiday. She said, me and my friend are going to be going to Las Vegas. So little tiny changes
Oh my God.
that happen are revealed because this is an indicator that there is increased attraction to this bad boy type of guy, same man. So you can't say like, oh, one is so like dreamy and the other one's so ugly. No, it's the same guy, controlled. It's his behavior came across as like, go out with me, I don't care, whatever, but if you do go out with me, like you will start writing with your left hand if you're right-handed. That's how great it's going to be.
So, all right, that's what's going on internally. What about the local ecology? How do sex ratios change women's desire for career versus family?
So I looked into this a little bit, and it was really stemming from like, why was I such a nerd in high school? Like, why do women, I just wanted to understand like what makes women like into sort of lean in type of woman versus a lean out type of a woman. And, I wondered if well, first of all, I wondered if how they did, on the mating market when they first, hit puberty had anything to do with it. But then I found that, one thing that disrupts the mating market is sex ratio. So when there's no men around, women become more competitive because there's just, fewer partners out there for them. We know that. And one of the things that we looked into was, do women prefer, which is their ambition change? So they were becoming more ambitious and they were desiring career over family. So that trade-off, when we led women to believe that this is a college campus, that there was just like so many more women around than there were men, then they were like, I want a career. And and not just any career. I want to be, on the leadership team of a corporate, company. And so but that's not just, so we say that's stated preference, I guess, but we found this in demographic data too, which it's not an experiment. So we can, when there are fewer men around, there's more women that are pilots and surgeons and lawyers. And so that's great news because women can and want to do this job, but it has a lot to do with like what's going on in the mating environment.
Is there an argument to be made as well that there's nothing else for them to spend their time on with the men, so I might as well invest it into that, but if the right man came along, then the career might stop?
Yeah. So the opposite of that is when they were just sort of like, when there were a lot of men around and there were a lot of great options, then women wanted family. So it's sort of like, your brain is kind of figuring out like what's going on in my environment. Is it good for, mating? Is it not good? And then sort of directing your behavior accordingly. And if it's a good time to strike and you can get a really high quality partner, which is sort of the opposite was we were leading them to believe that there were a lot of men on campus, then it was like, oh, I'm going to do family. And so we started calling it Plan A and Plan B. And I'm a plan. So it's like, and there's nothing wrong with Plan B. I'm a Plan B person because I was a nerd in high school because I couldn't get out of my own head about being a nerd ever. I was just like career. I mean, and then I went back to my high school reunion and they're like, oh, okay. Oh yeah, Kristina, you were always in the library. But they're like, oh, who are you? They didn't remember me because I was always, I guess, in the library. But yeah, so I think that it changes with the mating market.
The wildest thing that I see there is the sex ratio hypothesis. When I first learned about that, it blew my mind. Then I learned about the changes in mating strategy, so short term versus long term, and women are the gatekeepers to sex. They're the supply and men are the demand. So it's kind of them, I guess, that play by the rules that are going on. Men don't really have the rules. They're just go, go, go.
Mm-hmm.
But what you've got going on here is behavior influenced by the mating market, the local mating market, which isn't necessarily to do with mating.
Right.
You would say your career as a woman is one of the things that is, as a man, you might be able to make the argument that your career choice is very much influenced by the mating market,
Mm-hmm.
that you want to. I would imagine that the reverse may be true, that men also become more competitive for particular types of jobs in a place where there are fewer women. But the fact that you are influencing behavior which doesn't directly relate to your mate value, really,
Yeah.
based on something which is to do with mating dynamics, is absolutely insane.
Yeah, well, I think it's like we're so hardwired to figure out what's going on in the mating market that it just it trickles down to whatever the tools are to get your own resources. Like, well, I might have to go out and figure out how I'm going to do this on my own.
Yeah.
Or and we really don't know. And it could be like, well, I'm going to go into these high-paying careers because maybe there's more men there. But we did.
Oh my
find
God, that is such an unpopular theory to go for. The reason that women want high-paying careers is because there's maybe some hot men in there.
Yeah, I mean, so no, but we don't know. But so the leading uh, theory is that you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And
maximize independence.
Yeah, and running a household is really hard, and it just is so much. It is so much easier when there's another adult around. When you have someone that you can pool resources with, it's easier and it's more difficult because then you got to manage the relationship. But I think that a lot of women, especially young women, that is that is really important. Like, am I going to find my soulmate, my ideal mate right now, or is that going to be really hard for me? Because if it is, then I've got to figure out in this world with these tools how I'm going to support myself.
You did a ton of work around buying behavior, what consumer behavior, what women buy and why they do it and stuff. If someone has never thought about, I don't even know what you call it, gendered buying, if someone's never considered this, why do women buy the things that they buy? What is there to know here?
Well, that's a really broad question. And so my first, I guess, series of studies that I looked at women's consumer behavior was looking at their consumer behavior across the ovulatory cycle, because these fundamental motives that we have in life, mating, get status, have kids, protect yourself from disease, these are all fundamental motives. And when women are ovulating, like we were talking about before, they're really interested. Their sexual desire goes up, so they they want to look. I thought, well, if their sexual desire is up, maybe they want to look sexier. And so the first study I ever did was looking at women's clothing preferences across the ovulatory cycle, and we would find these really strong differences in what women would choose to wear for themselves out of their own closet, or even just imagined in their head, or when they were shopping on a website. It was just it was sexier. They wanted to look more fashionable. So they were spending, more money and choosing more items that were, sexy when they were ovulating, and less so when they weren't. But all of these, I always call them tools, because that's what products are, is tools. So it's like, what does evolutionary psychology have to do with what we buy? And it's like, there's so many products out there. Most products out there serve these fundamental motives that have deep evolutionary roots. So even lipstick, certainly wasn't around 10,000 years ago, but the motivation to buy is still a motivation that was around a long time ago, and influenced by all of the factors that we're talking about, like who am I going to the club with, who's in my social network, how do things look for me, am I married, am I single, all these things. And then we can predict how that might change women's consumption. But yeah, so we got clothes, we've got, all these different cosmetic procedures and skincare
Do
and just
women
everything.
do women wear different types of makeup throughout their ovulatory cycle?
Yeah, they wear more makeup when they're ovulating. And I think that's just, and I didn't run this study, but my colleagues did. And I think that's just a product of wanting to, just feeling sexier, wanting to be more attractive, wanting to optimize mate choice, and being more focused on that.
Is that mediated by whether they're in a relationship or not? Do single women do this more than married women?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that because I don't remember from their data. But a lot of these differences, we don't. I know that I talked about a really big one with the politics, but for consumer consumption, I don't find differences, even with between heterosexual and lesbian women. They still are showing, the greater interest in, products that will make them look more attractive. What's
the fundamental driving force of women's purchases then? Is it signals of youth and fertility? Because there's like bags and heels and other things that I don't know what women buy, whatever that is.
Yeah, so for many years that was sort of and I guess it still is women's luxury consumption, because women spend more on luxury than men do, with the bags and the purses and the clothes and it's so it was a conundrum because men don't know the difference between Louis or a Louboutin. They don't know a Louboutin from a JCPenney shoe.
Neither do you at the moment.
No. So what are so why are women buying luxury if it's not for men? Who might it be for? And so the original sort of past few papers that we had was about must be for intersexual competition purposes with other women. So they're signaling to other women, signaling something to other women, and it might just be their status to sort of show don't mess with me, like
look at all the spare resources I've got, I could wreck you.
Yeah, I mean, like, and or investment from a partner. But
so sorry, could that be a sign of this is how much my partner's invested in me, therefore you don't want to try and take him away from me because he's just spent $3,000 on this handbag?
Something like that. Yes, it could be that.
Very interesting.
And it could just be, luxury is associated with high status. And status buys you so much in life that we just, kind of have, we just go gaga for trying to get as much, status and accolades and people clapping for us and, that we can, because it used to be so valuable. It was sometimes the difference between life and death. And so buying luxury, the motivation might just be to associate with those people or associate yourself with the kind of people who can buy these things. And that's why, I think all these luxury brands have like keychains and little like cheaper things that all the rest of us can buy to just feel a little bit like we're part of that group.
We're often told about the importance of dominance hierarchy and status for men, status-seeking men, high-status men are the most attractive ones. What does status mean, or how does it manifest for women?
So I don't know that it's different for women than it is for men. Although, I mean, I think it's the same in terms of, a dominance hierarchy. I think it's still like I have this, I won. And it works the same way. I always consider it, sort of the same in men and women, and maybe it manifests differently. And it does in terms of, maybe the consumer products that they're attracted to, but, for, or career striving, we did manipulate the mating market, and when men were gone, women were like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a certain, so when you kind of take men off the table, then women are free to express these, preferences for following passions or jobs or whatever, and I find that really interesting because men and women really have these curiosities that feed into career preferences, and then women learn that there's a trade-off to be made.
Yes, given the fact. Just going back to what we talked about before, given the fact that the local ecology, the sex ratio between men and women heavily mediates what women want to do with regards to their career versus family,
Mhm.
how do you work out which one's the set point?
You mean which one is sort of the
Base.
default?
Yeah. Which one's the natural, then you've got naturalistic fallacy, which one's the desirable? Well, then what do you mean in terms of desirable? What are you optimizing for? Whose value judgment do you put on top of it? My point being, if it can be mediated so heavily by the local men, like
Yeah.
we don't know whether or not women that are going to go to their graves are going to be more satisfied with a lot of houses and no kids, or the ones that have lots of kids but are scraping around for money, or all of this stuff. Like, I'm just trying to work out what it is, where we work out what it is that women want without the external influence of the environment. Is that even something that's possible to do?
Yeah. I I I don't know. I mean, that's a really tricky question. I think there, emerging is more variance in things like we were talking about before, like women wanting to have kids. Do they, do they end up having kids? Do they not? Do they go into high-paying careers? Do they not? So I don't know. I guess my answer is like, marriage is set up, it highly benefits men, and I don't want to paint the picture of women being doomed, but a lot of women do come up against this, trade-off, and some women are totally happy just moving forward and being focused on their careers, and some women, that's not for them. They're going to be more aligned with staying home and building a family, and that gives them that sort of sense of value and accomplishment, just like it would be if for another woman working up the leadership team ladder. So I think there's a lot of individual differences there. I guess the commonality is that most women run up against this, having to figure out the trade-off.
Yes, that's a good point. The fact that the trade-off is there no matter what, for women, and given the fact that there are fewer femcells than incels, most women at some point will probably have the option to make this decision. But this is, as I was reading through some of your work, I kept on thinking about Barry Schwartz's The Paradox of Choice.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because that has to play a huge part of this. For the
Right.
people that don't know, Barry Schwartz uses this really great example in this legendary TED Talk where he talks about genes. And he says, like, in the 70s, there was one type of jeans. And you'd go in and it would be, what's your waist size? And you'd walk out with a pair of blue jeans. And now you go in and it's, do you want skinny or boot cut? Do you want the stonewash? Do you want the black? Do you want the stretch? Do you want the whatever? And we would think that being utilitarian, rational beings, giving people more options would mean that they would be able to refine their choice more accurately to what they genuinely want versus what the market can offer them. But it turns out quite the opposite, that this decision fatigue, existential dread of denim choice that we're faced with causes us to regret the decisions that we didn't make and to vacillate about the decisions that we should make a lot more. And this is, I mean, the genie's not going back in the bottle with regards to women being in the workplace, educational attainment, equality, and so on and so forth. But there is an interesting question to be asked around whether or not this overall makes for a happier existence. The question basically is ignorance bliss? And no one's running, no politicians running on the policy of women. Have you ever considered regressing back to the 1940s? Because it's very, I know that you might not be happy about the lack of money, but it would make your dating options a lot easier.
Yeah. So there are many negatives about, turning the clock back to the 1940s, but there would be a lot of decisions that were made for you that you wouldn't have to, worry about. I strongly believe that the abundance of choice has made us so much more miserable than we ever have been. In fact, I have a paper called Serendipity because we don't have a lot of that anymore, because of the sort of saturation of choice.
How do you mean?
Because of the endless choices that we find in, from consumer products to mates. It's just, and like you were saying, even within category of consumer products, there's just so many, different kinds of pairs of, blue jeans that we could have, we could choose. And then, the opportunity cost is so salient, and, we're choosing wrong. And then, we defer choice altogether, or, other things. And we've actually looked at, so you think about dating apps, right? Where, our brain is getting the signal that there's just so many, people out there that could possibly be our partners. And and even though they're in our phone or on our TV or wherever, our brain is at some level categorizing these people as part of our group. And, because no one came into your living space thousands of years ago who wasn't a part of your group. So it's potential. And so, so there's just so many people out there. And so you choose one, you go on a date, and, you're thinking about that person versus all of the other ones that could be better out there that you have really easy access to. And it does something to satisfaction. So we tried our best. So I have a paper on serendipity, and it's all about consumer products. But we did try to do this with mating, where we gave people, a choice of a partner, and they picked a partner, and then they kept seeing that partner over and over again. So it was like we were doing like a saturation. And we do this with consumer products all the time, where eventually you're like, oh my God, I love this cookie. And you're like, I can't eat that cookie again. And so like eventually like exposure decreases attraction. Like the more and more you're seeing this person, sexual attraction.
Did you see that most recent paper that came out about women's decline in sexual attraction occurring more quickly than men's?
I did. And my female colleagues were like, yes. So we knew this, and now we already knew this, but now there's some data behind it. And then the men were like, there's got to be moderators. And we're like, yeah, probably. But I think, overall there's a decline in marital satisfaction that just happens for men and women over time, as it does with like anything you see again and again and again. It's not going to have that sort of like magical spark. But what we had two conditions. One in which it was set up like a dating app, where they were looking at a bunch of pictures, chose one person to talk to. And then we had another condition where they were just like, it was like what now Netflix has, because they caught on to it, like random assignment. Here's your mate. And then those people were more satisfied over time, even doing the different exposures, than the ones that chose from a selection of mates. And we think it was because their brain was on, wow, there's so many others out there. Like I chose this, like you have endless supplies of candy. You can only choose one kind. And then you finally make your choice. It's really hard to choose. And then it's okay, but I wonder what that one would have been like. We're thinking about that. Whereas if you just sort of randomly come upon something, you like it more. It's like, when a song comes randomly on the radio, you like it more than if it was something you chose from your playlist. That's
interesting. Okay, so I understand where the serendipity thing gets lost. I think when it comes to me, I'm the sort of person who, when I was a teenager, would obsess over all the different features of all the Nokia phones, and I'd think about the one I was going to upgrade to for 6 months beforehand and stuff like that. And there's still elements of that in me. One of the solutions that I've found to kind of get around that is to place an arbitrary constraint on how long I have to make the decision. So if I've got to choose between 3 different hotels, I'm going to Rome. I'm taking my mum to Rome in a couple of weeks' time. And I was just like, look, you've got 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to choose. Once the 10 minutes is up, that's it, you're done. So it actually did help a little bit. I don't care. I don't think about the other hotels that I could have, would have, should have got. I've got, 3 or 4 different tabs open. That one, best location, we'll go for that one. And done. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I'm having to create this weird temporal mind prison in a desperate attempt to not feel choice anxiety is a strange one. All right, so thinking about one of the common tropes or headlines that you see online with regards to women purchasing decisions and stuff like that, how right do you think it is to lay women's desire for focus on beauty and dieting and signals of fitness at the feet of capitalism?
What do I think about making,
how right is it to throw those? Because I mean, a lot of the time the accusation is these big wigs sat in offices in New York City designing marketing campaigns that do the whatever. How right is that to lay it at the feet of capitalism?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I mean, I'm an evolutionary psychologist, but I'm in the marketing department. So I don't know. It can be totally off base at times. It totally depends, and I think it changes with how society is changing. Certainly, things are changing rapidly now with especially in the beauty industry. It's like all more inclusive. It's not exactly what was before. Victoria's Secret took huge, amount of, online punishment for their not keeping up with the times and being more inclusive. And, they eventually had to, get with it or die completely. And so that's really, new. But, I don't know, is it right or wrong? I guess, consumers, can, be smart and make up their own minds and realize that there's always going to be someone behind the curtain that's trying to manipulate your preferences and your purchasing. I mean, that's, sort of what, the advertising and marketing industry is all about. If that's what you're getting at, like, it's really hard to say it's right or wrong, but it's going to continue because businesses are always invested in strengthening the bottom line, even if it means by creating an illusion for you in order for you to buy the product.
Looking at the different consumer purchases of men and women, were there any surprising purchases which were actually effective at attracting a mate?
Oh, that's a really good question. And we didn't measure the end result. Like, did this attract a partner because you bought this? I think some of my colleagues looked at, like, men looking at women with, expensive handbags, and and that's where, and found that the men were like, wow, she's going to be a lot of maintenance. So we didn't find that men were more attracted to women with, designer handbags than they were with women with, no handbag or lower class handbag or whatever. But I've never really looked at, outcomes of, consumer purchases on dating. But, I think this goes for men and women, people who pay attention to their attractiveness and, try to clean themselves up and just be, attentive to general overall, hygiene, that is going to be very helpful, those products, in attracting mates. And then, but again, the jury's still out on women's luxury purchases. Like, does that help? I don't know. Maybe aligning with, high status groups does buy you something. But for men, having these, having a car that's, like what is it, Maserati or something, that helps. So because women are more interested in status when it comes to, their partners than men are.
There was an interesting study that I saw on Tinder to do with right swipes on a guy, exactly the same guy, but they replaced the Nissan Altima with a Lexus. And the guy, it was like a significant increase in the number of right swipes. But that being said, it's also a significant number of increases in right swipes if you've got a dog versus if you've got a cat. A cat is actually below the control, and the dog is significantly above. So what you want is a dog in a Lexus, basically, and that's presumably maximum right swipes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because a dog is masculine and a cat is feminine.
That's how the man was interpreted. Yeah. Also that I think women understand the fact that the dog requires care, that the cat is basically an independent creature.
Right. Yes.
He has to be more paternal. He has to be able to be conscientious, industrious, reliable, orderly. Yeah. This dog would be dead. Whereas the cat you can be the worst cat owner in history and the cat will still be fine.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so putting a man in a situation where it's like, think about gender differences in attraction for a woman walking on an airplane holding a baby versus a man walking on an airplane holding a baby. Like, if you can do this real live experiment, and I've seen it, where, everybody's happy that a man is carrying a baby.
The woman's carrying the baby. Everyone's fearful that it's going to cry. Not another one.
Sit next to me. And I think, so I think that it's like women so this is another wanting to have it all. We all want to have it all in our mate. We want our mate to be socially dominant, and he's going to charge up that hill and be, risk taker and, fight everyone but us. And then at home, be, real
nice and agreeable and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So I had Logan Ury, who is Hinge's director of relationship science, on the show.
Oh, okay.
And obviously she's got access to just so much fascinating data. She calls them an era of maximizers, these people who want to maximize absolutely every different statistic that they can have with their partner. And when you've got mate matching, it's strange, right? So you have assortative mating, but you also have this, everyone wants to just pitch themselves a little bit beyond where it is that they are. And when you combine that with the fact that in fact, it might be the single biggest predictor of extramarital sex is premarital sex, or extramarital partners is premarital partners. Basically, the more people that you've slept with before your partner, the more likely you are that you're going to cheat.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when you combine all of that together with a global sexual marketplace that is the most frictionless way to just browse all of the different types of genes that you would be potentially prepared to try on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about, like, how that is operating inside a brain that's used to coming in contact with 50 to 100 people, and that's it, and then you die, you know. Yep. And now it's like, whoa, it's like blowing your mind.
Will's Costello's got this theory around to do with his incel research, where he said that you can achieve in a single day more rejection than a man would have achieved in his entire lifetime.
Yeah.
But the rejection hurts less, but it hurts less in the moment, but what's the cue that it's telling you? Is there something that it's keeping track? There's a little ticker. One other thing, I remember reading this ages ago. There was an interesting way to frame married couples purchasing choices. So when you have a married couple, you are pooling together your resources into a single bank, right? A single block of cash. And then from that, each person draws out money. But the men and what they spend their money on and the women and what they spend their money on seems to continue to be signals of fitness outside of the relationship. The man is buying the watch, which signals status, prestige, the fast car, which means that if he was on Tinder, he would get more right swipes. He'll certainly get more looks from the women that are on the street. The woman is still signaling fertility and youth. Maybe she's getting cosmetic procedures. Maybe she's buying expensive makeup and expensive beauty products and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Is there not something really like kind of hilarious about the fact that both of these people have pooled their resources together to then separately spend them on things that signal mate fitness?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And not surprising, I guess. We have these monogamous marriages, but it's not our mating system. So it never goes away. Like, you don't get married and then you're, completely dead from all these other the motivations that we have for people externally. In the work that I did with having a highly attractive bad boy type of guy, and looking at women's choices of products across the cycle, like I said, we didn't find differences between heterosexual and homosexual women. Homosexual women were still making themselves more attractive when they were preparing to meet the bad boy.
No way.
Yes. And so
what do you think's going on there? It's just so deep-seated that even someone who isn't sexually attracted to them with their current sexual identity is...
Right. That's what I thought. I thought initially I was like, well, maybe it's because we just as women didn't have a lot of control over mate choice. We had some control, right? But not, as much as we have right now. So maybe it's that. But also what occurred to me is that, attractive people tend to be the people who are higher status and get, favored and, get the better jobs and get the better resources. And so maybe it's just a cue to not, to look good so that this person likes you.
You're just currying favor through halo effect. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's so it could be that, although, like I said, we didn't find that, and these were ovulating because they were ovulating homosexual women, I should say. So that's kind of, it was that I thought that it was just like, this is the hormonal profile, but it's not directed to the target you would think. But it could still just have value if, you're going to be meeting this person. And so, and I know that's not exactly what you meant by the pooling of the resources and then people still spend it on, those things, but, hey, aligning yourself with what's externally valued still reaps rewards. So
plus we are no longer stopping trying to attract our partner as well.
Yes, that's true.
It's whatever you would say, like intra-marriage.
Yeah, I guess that should have been my first thought. You still have to keep the
other half happy, and attracted. Yeah. And presumably the cues, it's not like the cues change that much. Yeah, men's testosterone might go down a little bit. Women are a little bit more aggressive if they smell the newborn baby's head. But fundamentally, we're still running on the same sort of programming.
Right, yeah.
How do you... I keep on having this conversation with people because I'm touching on a lot of evolutionary psychology at the moment because I'm fascinated by it and it's not going to stop, so sorry. But a lot of people that listen to a good bit of the stuff that comes out from the show mention that the more that they learn about evolutionary psychology, the less that they can see people as people. They don't see them as the architect of their own actions. They see them with less agency. How have you integrated your increasing understanding of the motives that drive human behavior without losing your mind?
Well, because we have a prefrontal cortex, and I love it and I hate it at the same time. So it means that, the hormones don't take over completely like they do in other animals, where it's just you become a robot and it's like you switch, and I'm seeing that in my female dog. I think she was going to get spayed. I put it off because she's in the middle of her cycle, and she just totally changes all her behavior, and she's just like looking for, just her behavior is just so crazy. And male dogs.
Did she have a phantom pregnancy?
No, she didn't. She just is a puppy, and she went into heat before I thought she was going to, and I want to let her complete the cycle before I spay her. But I see the change in her behavior, and it's just like really automatic, like almost like an automatron. Like, she is one thing the next, and another day she's just like can't wait to find a partner, and that's all she's thinking about is what male dog can I get in front of, and so at a basic level, it's that. Now humans are so much more complex than that, but we still, like I was saying before, we still have sort of the parts of our brains that we share with all mammals, even, all organisms. If you go even deeper, reproduce. So we like sex, we like to rest, we like to eat, all those kind of things. And then, what makes us human is the part of our brain that, we can intellectualize all this stuff. And I actually find it so much more helpful to my well-being to think about this. Research shows if the game is rigged in some way, and how it's rigged and how it's set up, it just makes how you get through the day a lot easier. It certainly does for me. And, it's not to say that we're sort of automatronic, like animals, but we kind of need the blueprint and to be like, to sort of find these workarounds. I feel this way because of this, because I'm just feeling really competitive with this person right now. And that's probably because it's something I'm lacking in my life. Or, we can do the sort of backtrack of, when we don't feel our best, or, so I don't see it as such a sad story as maybe others do.
I don't either. I mean, for me, the only way that you can transcend your programming is by understanding it, right?
Absolutely.
Like, that's the first step.
Right. And so, as much as I understood like the pushback that I got for the one paper that I had on politics, my approach has always been like, let's try to understand things. And so, replicate it, see if this is even a thing for sure, but don't say that it just, can't be, because let's just not look at this anymore. It certainly scared me away from looking at it anymore. But, I still think that we're in the business of, building knowledge, and it has to be across the board knowledge, not like knowledge that's convenient and some that, is feel good. It's just, this is life. And I want to understand my life just like we understand the lives of other organisms, and we don't, put, our opinions on them.
Yeah, that's the way that I feel. Robert Wright's The Moral Animal was the first thing I ever read about evolutionary psychology. And as I was reading through that, it was kind of like, I don't know, veils falling in front of my eyes. And every single time that I learned something else, I'm like, okay, well, the amount of satisfaction that I get from understanding why we are the way we are and the programming that we have, as far as I'm concerned, way, way outweighs any discomfort that I have to deal with for the fact that it's going to be, I'm going to have to understand that the reason he's being aggressive is because of male parental uncertainty or whatever it is that is causing somebody to act the way that they do.
Yeah.
I find it beautiful. I genuinely do. And the only way that you can transcend it is by understanding it and being aware of it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Kristina Durante, ladies and gentlemen, if people want to keep up to date with the stuff that you do, where should they go?
They can find me on Twitter at Kristina Durante. I'm also on Instagram at Kristina_Durante, and then KristinaDurante.com.
Fantastic. Kristina, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's happening, people? Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.